So what I'm going to talk about is something called value network analysis. So you saw some of the things that Drew put forward, which is really, some of it was organizational network analysis, some of it was social network analysis. You're looking at social networks, you're looking at how organizations relate. And what I found, one of the simplest tools is value network analysis, which I'm going to explain to you and give you some examples. And I want you to think about, do you want to do one? So after lunch, if we want to, we can do one. We can decide how much time we spend, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, something like that. I've done these with a variety of organizations. And one of the nice things about value network analysis is that it requires no special tools. And the end result is that it lets you see your ecosystem, whatever you decide that is. It could be the City of London, it could be a borough, it could be the nonprofit sector, something like that. It lets you see it in a new way and ask better questions. I've done this with organizations where they've seen their organization from a new perspective and they've actually changed their operating models as a result of it. So I'm just, again, this shouldn't take more than about 10 minutes. So value network. This is Verna Ali, who really has been the proponent of value network analysis, right? So this is what she calls a value network, right? Does that make sense? Anybody, any questions on that? I don't think I have to read it out loud, do I? Okay, so really what it is, it talks about two things. It's process analysis and organizational network analysis. And it talks about people, very much so. We talk about roles, different roles within the network. And there are two things that we look at. We look at tangible assets, right? And these are examples: goods, services, cash is considered a tangible, and intangible: knowledge, trust, reputation, a number more. And I'll show you some examples of ones that were done. So it's a way in which we look at, we define a bounded system. We say, again, we could say City of London, for example, right? And then we take a look at, we define roles within that. So a role could be nonprofit organization. A role is not a CSV, right? The role is what people, is what is actually happening within that. Again, I'll show you examples. I'll show you some private sector ones, some public sector ones. This is just, I use this with my private clients. It just shows, for interesting example, is that basically since 1975, the way in which we measure the market has flipped. It used to be 15% intangible, 85% market evaluation on the Standard & Poor's 500. Now we're looking at 85% intangible, 15% tangible. What does that mean? I mean, as a citizen, one thing that it means is that with intangible assets, we're getting much higher volatility, right? When you have 500 cows, or you have, 10 tons of gold, that stuff doesn't change. It's 10 tons of gold or whatever. Yeah. But when you have a company like Google and their asset evaluation is based upon an algorithm, and somebody comes up with a new algorithm, or, I mean, we've seen just recently, Pearson Education, I don't know if everybody knows the company, the biggest education provider, they lost 25% of their valuation last week. They just dropped, because they forecast that their revenues would be much lower than they had thought, right? Because the higher education market in the USA was anyway. So again, from the social sector perspective, is that we know that there's much more volatility in the financial markets as a result of higher intangibles within that. And we're going to talk about intangibles more from the social sector. So this is an example of a value network analysis. The way that we do this is that first thing that we do is that we define the roles. So here they've got services, sales, operations. Those are roles. That's not a division of the company. And then we map the tangible assets. Those are the solid lines. And we put an arrow on which way it's going. So you can see that from services, we have a thing called a statement of work that's going to sales. And from sales, we have an order that's going back to services. And then we can also take a look at, well, what are some of those intangible assets, right? We have things like insights, credibility. Those are, and feedback. So we have three here. And then you say, so what, right? We've now mapped this big deal. It lets us ask questions. So in this case, why does customer feedback here to here, right, only go to operations and not to the department responsible for service innovation. So in this case, I mean, that may be something that they didn't think about, and the company may say, you know what, we need to get a feedback loop that actually goes to the people who deliver the services. And I've actually done this with a large pharmaceutical company, and we were looking at how a community of practice was providing services to a community of scientists. And what they did is that they mapped this thing out, and they had all the arrows going into the role being the scientist, all the arrows going in, and there wasn't a single arrow going out. They went, ooh, we got to do something about this. Now, they've been working on this for, this group existed for 15 years. And that day, they said, stop, we're going to redo our Constitution. Right? All it did was get them to look at it with new eyes. And that's really what this is. This does not give, this is very, it's not explicit knowledge, this is very, it's your perception, it's whoever actually worked on this, right? But it becomes a way in which we can have deeper and better conversations about the relationships and the roles within the networks that we are touching. Right? And so, this is another one. Okay, anyway, just take a look at the dotted lines. Look at the things in there. Evangelism. That's a great, 2.0 Silicon Valley buzzword, right? About selling your product, marketing your product. But you can see the other intangibles. Technical education being one, expertise, support, recognition, prestige, right? Those are all intangible. And people, when they do this, sometimes have difficulties of what are those intangible assets. But more and more as we realize that within networks is that what keeps networks together, what makes them stronger is trust, right? And that mapping those intangible assets becomes very important. This also becomes a very good tool to talk to your funders. You can show this to the funders. And they can see, particularly if funder is a role, right? And they can see how this works. So here, so the whole thing is done. So this is one of the things I talked about, weaving the triangles. When you see this and suddenly you see a disconnect between A and B, how can you actually provide feedback loops in different areas? How can we connect them together? So again, if it's a network, you can draw. That comes from Berna. Right? And if we can draw it, then we can find out where the gaps are, and then we can figure out how do we connect those types of gaps. So this is DNA I did several years ago, people working on it. So lots of stickies, lots of drawing, and people work together, and sometimes they clump the stickies together, and sometimes they pull them apart, because when you figure out what a role is, and then as you start mapping it, you go, well, actually, those are like, these three are together, and they stick them together. That's a very interactive process of 5 to 10 people sort of working together and trying to come up with a way in which they can model the organization, the ecosystem that they're working in. I mean, you can see this is not high tech. When that's finished, though, you can actually draw some things better. So the way that we do it is, again, this simple rules. Identify participants by role, but not order. Map first the intangibles, then the tangibles, then the intangibles, and then we take a look at it, we talk about it, right? And then later, you might, we wouldn't do that today, is in terms of conduct a cost-benefit analysis, actually take a look at that and say, well, what does that mean, right? And then do things like what ifs. Well, what if we did this? What could happen according to this model that we've developed? So this is one that I did for the New Brunswick Community College system. So at the provincial level, so New Brunswick is a province, and very small, 750,000 people total. And they have a community college network of about 7 or 8 colleges spread throughout. And we took a look at the value network because they were looking at some changes and they wanted to map things out. And so defined roles. So alumnus is a role, right? The Crown is a role because they are funded by the government. Then we have things like governance. And you can sort of see things going here. So things like the alumnus, right, who graduates, what they're getting is they're providing work to an employer down here, and the employer is providing them with a job. And the whole community college system for the past 30, 40 years was based upon what they call a work-ready workforce, right? So they were talking to employers, what do you need? We need welders, we need computer analysts or whatever. And they had this relationship that we are the place in which we provide the workforce for the employers, both public sector and private sector. But one of the things that we found is that people weren't getting jobs when they were graduating. Right? Because, I mean, we have the same situation you have here, is that there are fewer jobs in a lot of areas, or jobs have changed quite differently, and people were graduating and they weren't getting jobs. And so suddenly it was, oh, what's going on here? And what the college did was that they actually changed their objective, and they shifted to an entrepreneurial focus, so that it was we're not just helping develop people to get jobs, we're helping develop people so that they can create their own job, so that they can, so in terms of starting new businesses. Right? So again, this helps you take a look at a system and take a look at where those things flow, and also like what happens if one piece here changes, right? And then you can see some of the relationships between them. Right? That is value network analysis. So what we'll need a decision after lunch is, do we want to do one? We can do them in groups, and we can work through them and see whether or not there's value in that. And hopefully we'll be in different groups than we were for the first one if we do that. So something to think about. Any questions about what value network analysis is? Does it sound like it's there's some value? Some value in value network analysis? Some tangible value? Some intangible value? Yes?
Not trying to be difficult, but I remember Verna Alley had her value network analysis associate.
Yes.
But she couldn't make money out of it, and it
That's
just
correct.
So do people not realise this is useful?
I am amazed by how few people do value network analysis. Like I hired Patty Agcom a couple of times in the past. So Patty was a partner of Verna's. So Verna Alley in California really, she wrote the books on value network analysis, and then she had a business focused on this. But like any business, is that just because you have a good idea doesn't mean the business is going to be successful for a number of different reasons. And Patty has written a good book on I think it's called Network. So Patty is, I think I have this, yeah. So you see Patty Ancrum, you can just Google her. She's in the Boston area, so I know her better. And she ran a couple of workshops for me. And I just found it a really powerful tool. And see, the thing is with social network analysis and organizational network analysis is that you need tools, you need to do surveys, you need to get that data together. This is just people looking at their environment from a network perspective as opposed to from a hierarchical, institutional, organizational perspective. And it just gets you to see with new eyes. And that's where I think it's quite powerful. And again, if you get these built really nicely, and you can then give them to a graphic artist and create a nice one, it becomes a tool for you to talk to funders, partners, and other agencies to show this is the role that we play. So I think it definitely aligns with what Drew has done, and maybe using both of those kinds of things, or do a VNA and then use Kumio to draw it with or something. Are there a question in the back?
Yeah, just wondering about how much you can do with value network analysis because so much of it's unknown. So you've got a particular problem, and then you have to work out who's going to help you. And you don't know what the potential values are until the networks are formed.
Well, the value network analysis is to take a look at an existing network. And your best bet is to have people from a wide perspective on that network. So you don't want to have everybody in sales working on, looking at the whole organization. You don't want everybody who's working in, let's say, youth area to do a value network analysis of all of the volunteer sector in London. You want to have multiple representatives to do that. The other thing I think is interesting is if you do get a group like this together, is that you have 3 or 4 folks do the value network analysis of the same thing, and then you compare them. But again, it's a snapshot, it's subjective, it's not objective, right? And it really is about, can we get some deeper questions about this, and can this foster conversations, and in turn, will that lead to some type of action? So again, it's a different way of looking. That's pretty well. It's like a photograph. A photograph doesn't give you everything, right? And this is like a type of photograph to look at things. And where I find the power is that people don't think in this way. So that's where I see the positive aspect of VNA.
Could you apply that to project proposal?
I think that you could, because you can show. So if you're looking for funding, right, and then you're showing Okay, like even in the case of the community college, so we're saying, with this right here, I can go to administration and governance and say, you had, the premise of the organization was a work-ready workforce and jobs. Here's the data that shows that only X% of our graduates are getting jobs. We need to refocus the mission of the college network, right? So that gives you some of a way of taking something which is relatively complicated and simplifying it.
I'll just add one point to that. There's an increasing use of network maps of various sorts in evaluation in the US at the moment. So maybe charitable foundations are asking for people to produce network maps to show how connectivity, if that's something you're trying to increase, has increased over the time of the project that you're bidding. So it's becoming a factor now in actually evaluating whether that project has been successful in connectivity terms or not.
Yeah, and going to close because we should get something to eat. All models are flawed, but some are useful. Is this useful? It is flawed, of course it is. It's not a perfect map. Is this something that you can use to, again, ask better questions, see with new eyes, or present your case in a different fashion? Yeah. Okay.